They broke into his lakefront ranch thinking he was just another homeowner they could intimidate. But when the door shattered and their threats filled the air, they didn't know a U.S. Marine was standing on the other side. What began as arrogance ended with enforcers crawling out on their knees, broken in spirit, begging to leave. This is not just a fight over property. It's a war of pride, betrayal, and raw justice that will leave you questioning how far power will go before it crumbles. Before we begin, like this video and comment where you're watching from so I know you're here with me. The knock wasn't a knock. It was a shove that split the latch and sent the door recoiling into my chest. And before the echoes settled, two men in gray polos pushed through while Karen pointed past them like she owned my spine. Today they said the ranch was in violation and they were here to document everything. And I asked which law gave strangers the right to invade a home like a prize they'd already paid for. So why were their eyes already sweeping for the kennel and the dock? They tried to crowd the hall. I counted steps, counted breaths, counted the scar on the older one's jaw as if it could tell me where he learned to smirk at families. Karen listed fines with numbers big enough to drown a mortgage and said refusal meant seizure. And I told her refusal meant dignity, because a person can live without a dock, but not without a line. So whose line were they planning to erase today? My phone recorded from my pocket. The red dot felt like a heartbeat. The younger enforcer brushed my shoulder, trying to herd me backward as if I was furniture on wheels, and I set my feet and asked again for the statute. The section, the subsection. He answered with silence and a glance to Karen, who lifted her clipboard like a shield. So why did the paper tremble when I said I knew about the vote held in a room no neighbors were invited to? On the wall beside us hung my father's photo in uniform. He stared across the years with the same calm he taught me when storms want your fear before they take your house. The older enforcer followed my eyes and laughed under his breath, and something old and clean clicked inside my ribs, the way you do before you run toward fire instead of away. So who decided intimidation would work better than honesty in a town that still remembers the names on its memorial? Karen slapped a notice against the frame as if claiming ground. The letterhead was polished, but the signature was wrong. More ink than name. I read the date aloud and watched her mouth, because liars blink like swimmers coming up too fast. She told the men to proceed with interior photos to accelerate enforcement, and I told them no one crosses a threshold without legal cause. So why did the younger one suddenly check his buzzing phone like someone was whispering move now? My screen lit with a text from a neighbor at the public ramp. He said trucks were idling and a yellow machine sat hungry, and I knew the timeline had been shaved to the bone. I stepped closer to Karen and asked who promised a developer control of my shoreline by nightfall. And for a breath, she forgot her script, and her eyes flicked to the road as if she could already hear engines. So who was paying her to outrun sunrise? They wanted me angry. I gave them stillness. The older enforcer stepped into that stillness and tried to grab my forearm, and I let his momentum carry, pivoted, redirected, set him against the wall with a forearm across his shoulder blades. No pain, just lesson. The younger one froze, torn between pride and caution, and Karen hissed that I was obstructing. So who obstructs what when the first obstruction is a boot over a threshold that never invited it? I released him. He stumbled and straightened, flushing, and said they would document my aggression. I told him the camera documented theirs, and the county would watch our little play without the music they planned. Karen tried a softer tone, a neighborly appeal, said we could work something out if I cooperated. I asked what cooperation meant in numbers with commas and in signatures that don't belong to the people who supposedly signed them. So where does neighborly end and extortion begin? My hand found the dog tag that lives near my heart. Metal against skin, memory against threat. I told them I would give them one chance to step outside and start again at the gate with an officer present. The younger one muttered that they didn't need permission, only compliance. I smiled and said compliance is what bullies call consent when witnesses are late. So which word would sound better on a recording sent to a sheriff who still shakes the hands of the people he serves? If you've ever stood between your name and a paper that tried to steal it, like this video, and tell me in the comments where you're watching from. Neighbors we haven't met, yet might need this moment, and your voice tells them they aren't alone. So will you stand with me when the next door rattles at night? Karen signaled again. The older enforcer reached for his pocket, a baton half hidden like a secret. I stepped forward, took it gently, slid it to the floor, and nudged it back with my boot. No threat, only clarity. I said we were done pretending this was a routine inspection, and her face hardened into something that remembered the word seize better than the word serve. So who taught her that power is a costume you can wear even when it doesn't fit? I walked to the safe and spun the dial. Metal sang. Inside lay a sealed envelope stamped for the sheriff only, the kind you keep for the day someone dares you to be quiet. I turned with it in my hand and watched confidence leak from the room like air from a cut tire. The younger enforcer stared at the seal as if it had teeth. Karen took one careful step back and another, calculating. So what could be inside that turns bold voices thin? I said we would open it together when a deputy arrived, that I had more than a recording, that the clock they were racing would not forgive them. The older enforcer swallowed and flexed his hand as if pain was new to him. Karen tried to call for backup, but the words stuck, and for the first time her eyes moved to the floor like gravity had finally remembered her name. So which will arrive first now? The law at my gate, or the deal they promised behind closed doors? The envelope waited in my palm like a fuse that chooses its fire. A siren wailed somewhere past the trees, and the younger enforcer whispered to the older that they should leave before this got worse. Karen shook her head and told them to hold their ground, to seize documentation, to finish what they started. I lifted the seal toward the light and felt the room tense like a breath before a verdict. So when this opens and the truth walks out, who's ready to face it? The envelope burned in my grip like it already knew the choice was made. But Karen's glare dared me to crack the seal too early. Instead, I walked past her and spread everything across the table. Pages rustled, signatures gleamed under the light. Dates lined up like dominoes waiting to fall. The first sheet stopped the enforcer's cold. The president's signature was scrawled in ink, but anyone with eyes could see it wasn't hers. The loop of the letters was wrong, the flourish crooked. I asked Karen which hand she signed it with, and she froze because the truth was choking her. The younger enforcer tried to laugh it off, called it a clerical error, but I slid another document forward. Time-stamped emails. A letter from the lawyer. A payment marked with the developer's initials. The silence cut sharper than any shout. The older one leaned in, lips moving as he read the numbers. 6 zeros at the bottom line. The payoff for my shoreline. I said out loud the word everyone was dodging bribe. And in that instant, Karen's mask cracked wide open. My phone vibrated again. A neighbor, a kid no older than 17, sent me a video file. He'd been working a summer job, helping a contractor near the lake. He caught the man on a body cam bragging about bulldozers rolling in tonight. I hit play, the sound filling the room. The contractor laughed about tearing down fences before sunrise. The kid's voice trembled as he whispered in the background that they planned to flatten the kennel too. I looked at the enforcers, and for the first time their pride faltered. I forwarded the file to a deputy I knew. Not just any deputy. A Marine who once wore the same uniform I did. Seconds later his reply flashed green light. He would come, he said. The cavalry wasn't late, it was on its way. Karen's voice rose, desperate, accusing me of manufacturing evidence. I asked her why her brother's name was on the county permits I now held in my hand. That broke her. Her eyes went wide. Her voice shrank into a whisper. The inspector. She hadn't expected me to know. The room tensed. The older enforcer's phone buzzed. He tried to hide the screen, but I saw the single word glowing across it. Seize. His thumb hovered like a trigger, and Karen nodded. They were ordered to grab every page before I could pass it along. I gathered the files in one motion, pressing them tight against my chest. The younger one lunged, but stopped when I told him this wasn't just evidence. It was his lifeline, too. Did he want to be the one on camera seizing fraudulent orders? Karen spat venom, swore this was bigger than me, bigger than the county. She said I couldn't stop a deal already signed. I smiled and told her I'd stop men bigger than her when the price of failure was measured in caskets, not commissions. The words landed heavy. Her lips quivered, her eyes darted toward the door. She whispered to the older enforcer to hold me down, to stall me until her brother arrived. That was when I leaned across the table and let my voice drop to a blade. If you lay a hand on me again, you won't get up the same way. The younger one shifted, conflicted. Maybe he hadn't signed up for this level of corruption. Maybe the word bribe clanged too loudly in his ears. Karen snapped at him, called him useless, ordered him to prove his loyalty. His jaw tightened, but his hands stayed at his sides. Betrayal bloomed quietly, and she didn't notice. She was too focused on me, too furious to see her own ranks fracturing. I lifted my phone high and tapped send. Every document, every recording, every second of the video shot across to the deputy. Karen's shriek cut through the room, her desperation raw, but it was too late. I told her the sheriff's office would now have everything, that her clock was out of sand. A wail of sirens rose faint in the distance. The sound made her flinch. The sound made the enforcers trade glances. No one wanted to be in the house when those lights pulled up. The older one broke the silence with a growl. He said I wouldn't make it to the front door, not with those files in hand. His bluff was thin, but his eyes weren't. He'd fight. I squared up, feet planted, heart steady. I told him he'd regret testing the difference between intimidation and a Marine who never forgot his training. His shoulders tensed. His fists curled. But before he moved, the younger one reached out and grabbed his arm. Enough, he said. This isn't what we signed up for. Karen's face went white. Loyalty was slipping. Sirens were screaming. Evidence was secured, and she knew her brother was the last hope. I told her when that SUV rolled in, it wouldn't be salvation, it would be exposure. And then the first flash of blue lit the road outside. Tires screeched. Engines roared. The moment of truth slammed against the windows. The enforcers stepped back, caught between fear and duty, and Karen's eyes darted wildly, as if she could still control the outcome with a single command. I held the envelope high and promised them all the next person through that door would decide their future forever. And then the sirens cut sharp, doors slammed, and boots hit the ground. Who would walk in first? The deputy who carried the law, or Karen's brother carrying the cover-up? The siren screamed closer, but Karen wasn't waiting for justice. She snapped at the enforcers to seize the files, to pin me down, and end this before uniforms came through the door. They hesitated for a second too long, and that pause sealed their fate. The younger one glanced at me with guilt still etched on his jaw, but the older one chose pride over reason. He lunged with sudden fury, fists clenched, teeth bared like he thought brute force would erase paper trails. I met him halfway, 2 steps, a twist, and his body slammed against the floor before he even knew what happened. My restraint was deliberate, but the message was brutal. This fight wouldn't go the way they imagined. Karen's voice trembled into a shriek as she ordered the younger one to hold me, to keep me down while she snapped photos of the house to claim violations. He froze, torn between loyalty and survival, until desperation won. He grabbed my arm and tried to lock me. For a moment, the weight of both of them pressed against me, Karen already barking to hurry. But combat is rhythm, and rhythm belongs to those who don't panic. A pivot, a shift of leverage, and both men staggered. Their shoulders struck wood, their legs buckled, and the floor ate their pride. They weren't broken yet, but they tasted gravel, and the shock in their eyes told me they knew this wasn't a bluff. I warned them once, leave now and walk out whole. But pride is deaf. The older one groaned, pushed himself upright, and his hand darted into his pocket. A baton gleamed as he whipped it free, metal against fury. Karen's eyes lit with vindication, as if finally she had leverage. But I didn't flinch. In a flash, the baton was in my grip instead of his, stripped clean from his hand, and with a single motion, I slid it across the floor, out the door, into the night. Gone. His weaponless fist trembled. Karen's jaw dropped. For the first time, fear cracked her arrogance. She tried to cover it with venom, whispering that bulldozers would flatten everything by midnight. Her words weren't meant for me. They were a slip, meant for the enforcers to hear. But my camera caught every syllable. And when I repeated her line back to her, the echo felt like a hammer. Her men shifted uneasily. One muttered under his breath, and the younger one's face turned pale as if he realized he'd been dragged into something far darker than unpaid fines. The web of lies had snagged its own. The older enforcer charged again, pride pushing him past caution. But this time his body folded quicker, and his scream cut short when his knees buckled. He lay heaving, broken more by humiliation than by pain. The younger one's hands shook. He could barely meet my gaze. I told him this wasn't his war, but every second he stood behind Karen made him complicit. He stepped back, and that tiny motion was betrayal in her eyes. She spat his name like poison and vowed to ruin him too. Betrayal burned in the room louder than the sirens outside. Karen stormed past, snapping pictures of the walls, the ceiling, anything she could frame as a violation. She whispered frantically to herself, counting imaginary infractions. When she lifted her phone, I told her it was all being recorded live. She froze mid-click, her face drained of color. That's when headlights cut across the window. A black SUV idled at the gate, county plates gleaming. Karen's lips curled into a smile that tasted of salvation. Her brother had arrived. The enforcers scrambled up, battered but desperate, eyes flicking between me and the SUV. They thought their rescue was here. Karen's posture straightened, confidence flooding back into her veins as she whispered that my time had run out. She said when her brother walked in, every paper, every file, every recording would vanish under official authority. I stood silent, envelope still tucked against my chest, my shirt stretched tight with one word stamped across it, Marine. And in that silence, her smile faltered, just slightly, because deep down she knew authority only works until truth knocks louder. Engines rumbled from the road. More than one. Karen's smile flickered again. I told her not every set of lights belonged to her allies. She sneered, but her hands trembled. The SUV door opened, a polished shoe touched the ground, and a shadow stretched across the gravel. Whose shadow was it? The cover-up or the law? The SUV door opened slow, deliberate, as if the man inside wanted the tension to do his work before he even stepped out. Karen's brother emerged, pressed suit, polished face, clipboard in his hand like it was a crown. He didn't look at me first. He looked at her, and in that glance their entire secret deal screamed louder than any words. She exhaled with relief, her confidence reborn, as if the county itself had just walked into my ranch to erase me. He announced himself calmly, pretending neutrality, but the clipboard trembled just slightly. That clipboard wasn't blank. It carried a pre-signed emergency order to seize my property before dawn. I called it out. His eyes flickered, and suddenly the power in his stride cracked. Karen urged him to enforce it, told him I'd been violent, that I'd obstructed official duties. But I slid the sealed envelope across the table toward him. Inside was his voice on a recorded call, promising permits he didn't have the power to give, swearing to deliver the lakefront to the developer by week's end. He tried to wave it off, called it fabricated, but the truth had already lodged itself in the air. The enforcers exchanged wary glances. The younger one whispered, asking if this was really worth losing their names over. Karen snapped at him again, her desperation clawing at every corner of the room. Engines cut the night. Another set of headlights rolled up behind the SUV. This time it wasn't quiet authority. It was a sheriff's deputy, lights washing red and blue across every guilty face. And when he stepped out, he carried something the inspector didn't, a coin from the same unit I once served. Our eyes met, a silent recognition, and the weight shifted instantly. Authority wasn't on their side anymore. The deputy nodded once, subtle but powerful, and turned to the inspector with steel in his voice. Explain these signatures. Explain these orders. The inspector stumbled, stuttered, his polished calm unraveling under the deputy's glare. Karen's phone buzzed, and in her panic, she answered it on speaker without thinking. The developer's voice filled the room, smooth and arrogant, congratulating her and her brother on securing the shoreline. He mentioned the payout amount as if numbers were safer than lies. The room went still. Even the enforcers froze, realizing their own loyalty was worth pennies compared to the millions floating over their heads. Karen fumbled to cut the call, but it was too late. The deputy's body mic was live, capturing every word. The deal wasn't rumor anymore. It was confession. Rage flared in Karen's eyes. She screamed at her brother to do something, anything, to shut this down before it went further. He panicked, raising his clipboard like a shield, signaling toward the road. Engines roared again, deeper, heavier. The bulldozer convoy. Headlights speared through the dark as steel machines rumbled forward. The inspector barked orders, desperate, trying to push through one last move before the sheriff could arrive. The deputy stood his ground, hand hovering near his radio, but I stepped forward first. I told them if one track touched my ranch tonight, they wouldn't just face me. They'd face every camera, every recording, every shred of truth now locked in more hands than mine. The older enforcer cursed, torn between following orders and saving himself from a charge he couldn't outrun. The younger one shook his head, said this had gone too far, that no property line was worth jail time. Karen lashed out, slapped him across the chest, demanded obedience. He stood still, eyes down, no longer hers. Betrayal doesn't roar. It whispers, and in that whisper her empire started to crack. Her brother saw it too, saw control dripping through his fingers, and with his last ounce of arrogance he lifted the clipboard high, declaring the order official. But no one moved. The deputy's radio crackled. "Sheriff en route. ETA minutes." Karen's brother tried again, shouting for the convoy to roll. The foreman on the other end hesitated, confusion bleeding into defiance. They wanted clarity, real orders, not whispers. Karen's voice pitched higher, shriller, desperate. She promised the machines they'd be protected. But promises can't shield steel from law. Engines revved, ready, waiting for a final command. I drew a line across the ground with my boot, slow, deliberate, and told them if one will crossed it, they'd crawl out begging for forgiveness before dawn. The deputy didn't speak. He didn't need to. The silence said it all. Karen looked around the room, at her brother, at her broken enforcers, at the evidence now living in too many hands. She realized the walls were closing in. Her brother clenched his jaw and signaled again, frantic, waving his arm toward the convoy like a drowning man. The roar of bulldozers answered, engines rising to thunder. For one terrifying heartbeat, it looked like they would actually move. And then, with a single order, they did. The machines lurched forward, steel rolling, headlights burning, and the ground trembled under their weight. The cliffhanger was carved in steel. How do you stop heavy iron set in motion by greed, without breaking the law yourself? The bulldozers roared forward, engines screaming greed into the night, and Karen's brother raised his clipboard like it was scripture, commanding the machines to cross the line. I stepped into their path, calm but unyielding, and drew a carpenter's pencil from my pocket. With one steady motion, I bent down and carved a chalk line across the ground, pressing the forged notice beside it. I told them if a single wheel crossed this line, the sheriff would get the entire drive, every recording, every forged document, and their names would be etched into crimes no bribe could erase. My words cut sharper than steel, and for the first time the foreman hesitated. His hand hovered, waiting for a command stronger than arrogance. Karen's rage erupted, her voice clawing through the night, demanding the convoy move. She shouted that this Marine was bluffing, that I couldn't stop steel with chalk. But the deputy's mic was live, recording every word, and the younger enforcer whispered to his partner that maybe this had gone too far. That whisper was betrayal in Karen's ears, and she spun on him, hissing that he'd regret crossing her. His face hardened. He wasn't hers anymore. I stood firm at the line, my shirt screaming U.S. Marine across my chest, my body unshaken. The bulldozers revved again, trembling at the edge. The deputy lifted his radio and quoted the statute aloud, his voice carrying like a verdict. I repeated the code, word for word, daring them to ignore the law with the entire county listening. The foreman shifted in his seat, sweat on his brow. He looked back toward Karen's brother, who now barked orders more desperately than ever. The clipboard shook in his hand. Power was slipping, and everyone saw it. Then came the smallest, bravest act of the night. From the hedge, the teen neighbor stepped out, camera raised, his voice shaking but steady enough for the world to hear. He said this convoy had no right, that he'd stream it live if they crossed the line. The feed blinked red, live across dozens of phones. Karen's face drained. Her empire wasn't just breaking, it was bleeding out in real time. She rushed forward, snarling, lunging at the kid to snatch the phone. The deputy blocked her, but her desperation gave her strength. She clawed, reached, screamed that the phone was contraband. The boy stumbled, but I stepped between them, shielding him, planting myself like a wall no one could move. Karen's brother roared at the enforcers to seize the device. The older one staggered forward, torn and trembling, but the younger grabbed his arm and yanked him back. "Enough," he said. "This isn't worth prison." The betrayal split the air wide open. Karen's scream fractured into rage, her mask gone, her voice wild. She hurled insults at her own men, at her brother, at anyone who dared hesitate. She looked less like a leader and more like a cornered tyrant, and the cameras caught every second. The bulldozers growled once more, their engines rising like thunder. The foreman demanded clarity, one final command. Karen's brother waved the clipboard with both hands, shouting for them to roll. But his voice cracked. His power had thinned into panic. I took a step forward, pressing the notice flat against the chalk line. and told them this was the hill they'd crawl down from on their knees if they dared cross. The foreman's jaw tightened. His crew looked uneasy. No paycheck was worth being streamed into infamy. Karen lunged again, this time not at the boy, but at me. Her nails caught my arm, her eyes wild, her scream half madness and half plea. She begged me to let it go, said I didn't understand, said it was bigger than me. I stared into her fury and told her nothing is bigger than truth. The deputy's radio crackled again, "Sheriff, minutes away." The countdown was real, and her world was seconds from collapse. She knew it. Her brother knew it. The enforcers knew it. Everyone did. But then came the twist. Karen ripped the phone from the teen's hand, clutching it like victory, snarling that without the footage there was no proof. For a breath, she thought she'd won. The boy sobbed, reaching, hopeless. I looked her dead in the eyes and smiled. Because while she held the phone like a trophy, she didn't know the backup drive had already been slipped to the deputy minutes earlier. The proof was untouchable. She didn't just lose, she broadcast her desperation live to every witness who mattered. Her laughter turned hollow, faltering as realization dawned. She demanded her brother do something, anything, before the sheriff arrived. He barked at the foreman again, voice cracking, ordering the bulldozers forward now or never. And the machines responded, engines surging, steel rolling closer to the line. Dust rose, engines bellowed, and for the first time it felt like the line might be crossed. My hand clenched the dog tag at my chest. My voice cut the air like a blade. If you cross this line, you won't just face me. You'll face the end of everything you thought you owned. The foreman looked between the line, the clipboard, and the live stream. His jaw clenched, his hands tightened on the levers, and then, without warning, the bulldozers lurched, inching forward. The ground quaked. Karen's face lit with triumph. But her brother's eyes showed fear. He knew once that line was crossed, there was no coming back. The steel giants rolled closer, shadows swallowing the chalk. The deputy shouted for them to stop. The teen screamed. Karen laughed like a villain already crowned. And I stood firm, unyielding, as the treads approached. The question burned hotter than the engines. Would the line hold, or would it be crushed beneath the weight of corruption? The bulldozers rolled closer, engines rattling like war drums, their shadows swallowing the line I had drawn. Karen's brother waved his clipboard in frantic circles, shouting over the roar, desperate to force momentum back under his control. But control was gone. The foreman's jaw was tight, his men uneasy, and though the machines moved, their pace was hesitant. I raised my voice above the thunder and called out the exact statute again, spelling the violation in terms no lawyer could bend. The deputy echoed it into his radio, his voice sharp enough to slice through the night. Each word landed like a nail in the coffin they had built for themselves. Karen lunged at the teen again, screaming that without footage this meant nothing. But her scream was cut short when the deputy lifted a flash drive from his pocket. He held it high, the backup already secure. The boy's gasp turned into a shaky laugh, the kind that carries both relief and fury. Karen froze mid-step, the truth slamming into her with brutal clarity. Her desperate victory was already lost. The enforcers saw it too. The older one cursed under his breath, while the younger whispered that this was finished, that they were finished. His words cracked the brittle silence more violently than the machines. The inspector snapped, his polished calm shattered. He shoved the clipboard into the deputy's chest and barked that this was an official order, that he had authority. The deputy's eyes burned cold as he read the signature out loud, then asked why it didn't match a single file in the county archive. The inspector's voice faltered. He stammered, tried to bluff, but the bluff was paper thin. I reminded him that his voice had already betrayed him on the recording. His face went white, and even Karen recoiled, realizing her brother was unraveling in front of every witness that mattered. The bulldozers halted. Their foreman raised his hand, ordering silence. He shouted back that they weren't moving another inch without legitimate paperwork. The convoy shut down, engines hissing as the night fell heavy again. Karen's brother screamed at them, veins bulging, calling them cowards, threatening to ruin their contracts. But his voice carried nothing now. The men had seen enough. They weren't risking jail for anyone's bonus. Karen's rage exploded, her fists slamming against the air, calling her brother useless, calling the enforcers traitors, calling me a thief of her legacy. She looked less like power and more like collapse. The deputy opened his cruiser and streamed the teen's footage onto the dash screen. The images glowed in the night. The contractor's brag, the payout promises, Karen and her brother laughing at the table with the developer. The proof was undeniable. Neighbors had gathered quietly outside, their phones lifted, streaming too. Karen's shrill voice cracked as she begged them to stop recording, begged someone to listen to her version. But no one listened. Power had changed sides, and she could feel it crushing her. The inspector's desperation turned to rage. He reached for the clipboard again, clutching it like a lifeline, then spun toward the SUV. He barked at the enforcers to cover him, to seize the deputy's drive, to destroy the evidence before the sheriff arrived. The older enforcer took a half step forward, torn between loyalty and survival, but the younger blocked him, shaking his head. Enough, he repeated, louder this time, with a conviction that broke whatever chains were left. Karen screamed betrayal again, her voice hoarse, but the words were empty. Her men had abandoned her. Dispatch crackled through the deputy's radio. Sheriff on approach with warrants in hand. Karen's brother froze, clipboard clutched tight, his eyes darting toward the SUV. He bolted. His shoes hammered against the ground as he sprinted for escape. Karen screamed his name, shrieking for him to come back, but he didn't look back. The deputy shouted and moved, but the inspector was fast, fear fueling every stride. He dove into the SUV, engine roaring to life, wheels spinning with dirt. Karen ran after him, clawing at the door, but he shoved her aside without hesitation. In that single act, blood betrayed blood. Even family meant nothing when the walls closed in. The deputy raised his radio, shouting for intercept. Tires squealed. The SUV surged forward, headlights blinding, as if he thought he could outrun the truth. Karen stood frozen, watching her brother abandon her, her mouth open but no sound left inside. Her empire had collapsed in front of her, brick by brick, until all that remained was the sight of taillights fleeing into the night. And then the sharp cry of sirens cut through again, closer, stronger. Red and blue painted the road. The sheriff's cruisers closed the trap. Karen fell to her knees, sobbing in rage and humiliation, screaming that it wasn't over, that they hadn't seen the last of her. The enforcers stood hollow-eyed, caught between pity and fear, while neighbors' voices rose like a tide, streaming it all, immortalizing her fall. The SUV barreled forward, trying to vanish into the dark, but the sound of approaching engines promised it wouldn't get far. The truth was hunting, faster than any escape. The question now burned. Would the inspector escape into the night, or would the sheriff's blockade snap shut before he vanished? The SUV's tires screamed as it tore down the road, but the sheriff's cruiser slid across the lane, cutting it off like a steel wall. The inspector's desperate gamble ended in a crunch of brakes and blinding lights. Deputies yanked the door open, ripping the clipboard from his hands as he clawed uselessly to hold onto it. His polished suit was now nothing but a costume stripped bare, his face drenched in fear. Karen staggered forward, screaming his name, but no one listened. The deputies read his rights, their voices iron, while he shrieked excuses that sounded smaller with every syllable. Authority was gone, and with it, every lie he'd built his life on. The enforcers lowered their heads, shoulders slumped. Broken men who had once strutted into my home as if they owned it. Now they stood hollow-eyed, waiting for cuffs, waiting for the sheriff's pen to carve their names into charges they couldn't outrun. I told them pride put them here, that obedience to corruption had cost them their dignity. They didn't argue. They couldn't. They simply nodded, crawling out of my life like shadows begging for a corner to hide in. Their silence was louder than any apology. Karen collapsed to her knees, trembling hands pressed against her face. She wasn't barking orders anymore, wasn't spitting venom. She was whispering broken pleas, begging anyone who'd listen to believe she didn't know, that she hadn't meant for it to go this far. But the neighbors had streamed every second, her words echoing in recordings that no jury could ignore. She looked at me with eyes that carried both hatred and despair, as if begging me to let her rewrite the night. I told her the truth doesn't wait for permission, and her sob was louder than the sheriff's sirens. The inspector was shoved into the back of a cruiser, clipboard bagged as evidence. The deputy who once wore the same uniform coin as me gave a subtle nod, a bond forged in battles far from here. Karen's voice cracked as she cried out to her brother, but he didn't look at her. He couldn't. Even family collapses when the foundation is rot. She knew then she was alone, truly alone, abandoned by power, abandoned by blood, abandoned by those she once commanded. It was the kind of loneliness that eats a person alive in silence. The sheriff stepped forward, his presence heavy, his voice carrying the weight of justice. He thanked the teen, called him brave, and promised his footage would protect this county from predators like the ones standing before us. The boy's shaky smile carried more strength than Karen's empire ever had. He had done more with a phone than she had with an entire board. That irony wasn't lost on anyone. Neighbors clapped quietly, their faces lit by the glow of screens still recording. Power had changed hands for good. Karen was offered one final choice: resign and face charges with dignity, or refuse and be dragged through courts where every secret deal would be shredded in the open. Her lips quivered, her shoulders shook, and at last she whispered her resignation. She signed it with trembling hands, her name scrawled like an epitaph. The crowd exhaled. The sheriff pocketed it, the deputy sealed it, and the night itself seemed to release the breath it had held for hours. The inspector's suspension hit the county within hours. The developer's deal collapsed before sunrise, and the HOA board convened an emergency session the next day. They voted her out unanimously, stripping her title, stripping her throne. The teen's footage exploded across the internet, 1 million views before morning, every share another nail in the coffin of corruption. People cheered not just for the fall of one HOA, but for the reminder that truth, when armed with courage, is still stronger than greed. I walked back inside, slipped the dog tag into the safe, and called my mother. I told her the ranch was safe, that the lakefront would remain ours, that the family name would never be stolen by ink on forged paper. She cried softly, and in that sound, I felt the weight finally lift. Later that night, I took the developer's exposed bonus, the blood money they thought would bury us, and donated it to a veterans' legal fund. I wanted the next Marine, the next family, the next neighbor to never stand alone against power drunk on its own reflection. But the story didn't end there. The next morning, a plain envelope slid under my door. No name, no return address. Inside was a single key and a folded note. It said only, "Not everyone on the board was part of this. Some of us fought from the inside. This key will take you to the truth we couldn't speak." My chest tightened. I stared at the metal, cold and sharp, knowing the war wasn't finished, only paused. Because behind every fall, there's always a door waiting to be opened. And the question I'll leave with you, when I turn that key, what will be waiting on the other side? Before you go, if you felt every beat of this story, like this video right now and comment where you're watching from, because your voice keeps stories like this alive. And if you want more battles where truth crushes corruption, subscribe so you never miss the next chapter. Because this war isn't over, it's only just begun.